Welcome to the Cambridge Learning Center. I'm Leonardo Radomile. You know, one of the biggest responsibilities that you and I have as parents is making sure that our children are prepared for adulthood, making sure they get everything that they need to have happy, successful lives. One of the biggest elements in preparing them for adulthood is their education. Where a student goes to college, what they study, and how well they do can really give them significant advantages in later life. Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of misinformation out there. It seems like everybody has an opinion on how to get into schools, especially the best schools like Harvard and Stanford and a number of other schools. But unfortunately, some of the people who have the loudest opinions are not those people who went to those schools, who taught at those schools, or actually sat in the rooms where admissions decisions are made. In order to help you and your family make better decisions, at the Cambridge Learning Center, we've put together a series of videos on the college admissions process. And the reason we did that is because here at the Cambridge Learning Institute, our faculty attended those schools like Harvard and Columbia, taught at those schools, and actually sat in those rooms where those admissions decisions are made and helped make those decisions. We're doing a series of 6 videos. The first, this one, will give you an overview of what we consider the 5 most important elements of the college admissions process. In the subsequent videos, we'll be talking about each of those in depth. Now, unfortunately, a lot of parents think that college admissions, especially at the best schools, is driven almost exclusively by SAT scores and by grades. And although these are very important, they certainly aren't the most important factors. There are other factors that we call intangibles, things that you can't measure numerically, that really have a profound impact on the admissions process. But since we've started out mentioning SAT and grades, let's take a look at those first. Now, in order to understand how college admissions officials evaluate the SAT, you've got to really look at it from their perspective. Why do they look at these numbers and what do they mean to them? Well, the most important thing about the SAT is that it measures the capacity of a student to do work at a very high level. It answers the question, can this student do the work that's required at a top university? Now, at most of the top universities, you'll usually see an average of around somewhere between 2,200 and 2,250, somewhere around there, with some students a little bit above and a little bit below. But by no means is this a hard and fast fixed rule, so that if a student doesn't get below 2,250, they won't be admitted. I mean, clearly, and we'll talk about this later, a student can have scores below 2,250 and still be a very strong candidate. The same thing is true with grades. Now, with grades, just as SAT scores answer the question, can a student do the work? Grades tell an admissions committee, will the students do the work? Are they hard-working students? Not only do they have the capacity, but do they have the determination and the study habits in order to really make sure that that's done? Now, at the great universities, normally you'll see, when you take a look at the statistical analyses, you'll see the students bunched around 3.75, 3.8, or a little bit better on a 4-point scale. But again, there are always exceptions. There are students that will be below this. Now, what determines those exceptions? Well, with regard to grades, you may have a situation where a student had a really terrible first year, either because of a personal problem, something happening in their family, illness, or perhaps just not being able to adjust to school. And let's say she only has a 3.6 or a 3.55. Well, if the student's grades after that are on a definite up curve, and in her last couple of years she's gotten really stellar grades, like 3.8s and 3.9s, an admissions committee is certainly going to take that into consideration, and she's still going to be a strong candidate. Another example is, with regard to SAT scores, you may have a student from a poor inner city neighborhood going to an underperforming school where they don't even have advanced placement courses. And you may have that student who is, a straight A student working very hard, captain of the debate team, perhaps even has a part-time job, and still gets a 1950 on the SAT. Well, the admissions committee is certainly going to take those surrounding circumstances into consideration and not just apply a mechanical test. That student could still be a strong candidate. So again, keep in mind that these are not mechanical formulas that are just applied. It's a much more holistic process. At the great universities, the admissions committees really look at the whole student. They look at the portfolio holistically to see every dimension of what that student's like. Now, with that in mind, we can start talking about what we call the intangibles. Those things that you just can't assign a numerical value to. So what are these all-important intangibles that we've been talking about? Well, they break down into three categories. The first category is the activities a student's involved in outside of the classroom. The second category is a more general analysis of the general character and the nature of that student's personality. And the third characteristic is the all-important admissions essay and the supplements that most of the great schools require. Now, in order to really understand these intangibles, what you have to understand is how these great universities conceive of themselves, what they think their mission is, and what kind of culture the universities have on campus. Now, why is this important? Well, keep in mind that, for example, at a school like Harvard, you may have 36,000 applicants for about 1,600 seats in the freshman class. Out of those 36,000, perhaps 16,000 have virtually perfect SAT scores and grades. So how do you make a distinction? How do you get that 10% that really should be there? And in order to do that, you've got to think about what a school like Harvard's mission is and what the campus culture is. And the same is true with schools like Stanford and Princeton and others. Well, the first thing is that these schools very often conceive their mission, or at least a very important part of their mission, as training the leaders of the next generation. They really think of themselves as, training the Nobel laureates, the chief executive officers of Fortune 500 companies, the presidents of nations, and the leaders in the arts and sciences. So with that in mind, they're really looking for extraordinary students, students who have really distinguished themselves. In addition to that, they also look for students at the same time who will make a significant contribution to their class and their classmates. I remember when I was a student at Harvard, the first time I heard that's a very, very popular campus saying that you learn more from your classmates than you actually learn in class. And it wasn't until I was there for a while that I actually realized that, that was true. Because at a place like Harvard or Stanford, you're surrounded by these absolutely extraordinary students. These are students that have really accomplished incredible things in other areas or have had very, very significant experiences. And living with them, studying with them, interacting with them is such an enriching experience that really helps you to grow. And the third factor that admissions committees and universities take into consideration is, what is this student going to do in the future? What is this student going to do with the degree that they earn? And the reason for that is that these universities look at that degree as a big investment in that student. Why? Because that degree from a Harvard or a Princeton is going to give them access to an alumni network that is really going to connect them to a national and international elite. They'll only be 2 or 3 calls away from the White House, or 2 or 3 telephone calls away from the chairman of Goldman Sachs, or 2 or 3 phone calls away from a Nobel laureate working through their network of alumni contacts. So the admissions committee in the universities really know, we're giving you a certain amount of prestige and access. Are you going to use that to make the world a better place, or are you just going to go to Wall Street and make $80 billion? So all of these factors come together in determining how they evaluate these intangibles. Now, the first of these intangibles are activities. What does a student do outside of class that really makes them very interesting? Something that indicates that they're really going to make a contribution to their class, that they're really going to do something in the future to make the world a better place, and where they've shown some leadership potential. Now, these activities can be extremely varied, and they could be either school-related activities or non-school-related activities. So what do these interesting activities that really distinguish students look like? Well, they can vary all over the place, but usually they have one or more of certain characteristics. They are, first, things that really distinguish a student from others. They're extraordinary, or they're remarkable in the depth of what the students did. The second thing that they look for is leadership, because after all, these schools are looking to train the leaders of tomorrow. And the third factor is service. Are these activities, making the world a better place? Now, you don't have to go all 3, but these are the types of things that are looked for. We had one student who won a national robotics competition. It was very, very impressive with what he had done, and that was really remarkable. We had another student, a young woman who's now at Harvard, who literally talked her way into an internship doing research one summer in the South Pole with some very prominent scientists. We also had another student who's now, that we worked with, that's going to Cambridge University in England, who was at age 17 a member of England's national climbing team. So in each of these cases, you see a situation where a student has done something where you really notice it. It's something really remarkable. Now, in addition to just doing something remarkable, or in lieu of that, there are some students that show extraordinary leadership skills. And leadership is important because, remember, these schools conceive of themselves as training the leaders of tomorrow. We have one student who organized an educational program in rural China for poor students, students who otherwise would not get any educational advantages at all. And she not only organized the program there, but recruited teachers, trained them, and brought them to China, and created those relationships that made it a sustainable program. She ended up writing a book that was published by one of the most prominent publishers in China, and now it's being turned into a feature-length motion picture. That's extraordinary leadership. We had another student who was who's going to the Wharton School now, who was the captain of a state championship soccer team, who showed extraordinary leadership, not only in leading his team, but in really improving the performance of his teammates. We had another young woman who was spent a summer in Washington as an intern and organized a very large group of people around a particular political issue. So, again, anything that shows extraordinary ability and or leadership. And the third category is service. Projects where a student really distinguishes herself in doing something that is of benefit to other people and improves their lives. Now, I've given you some examples, but don't think that your child has to find a cure for cancer, or split the atom, or create cold fusion to get into a great school. By no means. We had one student in particular that stands out in my mind, who was admitted to both Wharton and Harvard, who spent a summer as a tennis coach in an inner city program. And he only worked with a few students, but the work that he did was so extraordinary in turning their lives around and in changing their outlook on life and giving them great opportunities for their futures, that it was something that really had an impact on an admissions committee. So again, it doesn't have to be this huge accomplishment. It's got to be something that really shows the student is different from other students and shows that that student has some real depth of character. And that gets us into the second intangible, which is an analysis of a student's general character. What is that student really like? What does the student's actions and the other things that they do really tell us about that student's personality, that student's character, and what their future might look like? It's almost like taking a look at a window to a student's soul. What is the character of the student like? What's their personality like? What's it tell us about their future? For example, you may have that poor student from an underperforming school in the inner city where they don't even have AP courses. And that student may be captain of the debate team, a straight A student, but in addition to that, living in a single parent home with 3 or 4 brothers or sisters, he's also working 25 hours a week to help support his family. That shows enormous depth of character, enormous self-sacrifice. You may have that other student who worked in a tennis program for inner city youths. And you know, that student gave up an internship at a very prestigious Wall Street firm in order to help those kids. That says an awful lot about that student. That says an awful lot about his character and what his future is going to be like as a leader and someone who makes the world a better place. So these character analyses are very, very important. And again, you keep in mind that these university admissions committees are taking a very holistic view. And finally, the third character intangible that we're talking about is the all-important admissions essay. And I cannot stress enough how important this is, because very often it's only in the admissions essay that a student can really show all of these intangibles and really tell a narrative that shows who he is and what he's going to contribute to the university community, what he's going to contribute to the world in the future, and what kind of a person he really is. So what goes into the all-important admissions essay and the supplemental essays that most schools require? Well, first, it's got to be extremely well written. It has to be something that just draws the attention of the admissions committee and brings them right in to give them a real bird's eye view of what that student is like. The other thing is it really has to show the different dimensions of the student's personality. And very often it's written around a key event that really brings out that character and shows who they are. And again, it's not supposed to be focused so much on accomplishments, although it's okay to mention accomplishments, as what that student sees as her future, what she sees her future contribution to the community, her future contribution to the world. And again, this is that one place where the student really shows up. So you can see from these intangibles that the evaluation of an admissions committee at a great university is really a very holistic process. There are so many factors that are taken in consideration. And how can you best help your child prepare for admissions to these schools? Well, the most important thing is to make sure that they get the best training available academically, but also help them discover what their real interests are. Help them discover what they're passionate about, what they're good at. Support those activities and help them be all that they can be in that particular area. Helping them be who they are, rather than trying to fit them into a particular box of numbers or characteristics or something else that you may have heard that admissions committees value. Help that student be everything that she's capable of. So we hope this video has been helpful to you to give you an overview of the admissions process. We have more videos and more information that are available to you. All you have to do is click the link below. So thanks for stopping by the Cambridge Learning Center. You're always welcome. And for the Cambridge Learning Center, I'm Leonardo Radomile.